And we're able to ascertain through our records that those fallen branches were previously tree pruning requests that they never got to. And so that's what happened. You had a question with that.
When you say that they're supposed to have like 30 pruners, but they only have 11?
Is the difference between the number of pruners that they're supposed to have and the number that they actually do due to budget cuts, so they're not hiring, or they can't find pruners?
That the head count in all city agencies is down, not because of budget cuts. I think that the next fiscal year might sort of eliminate positions, but they didn't eliminate them in the current fiscal year budget. They just haven't been filled. So that said, that was just one example. And then as we go through this, the other thing I want to say, I really resist the idea of prioritizing budget needs. I mean, to some extent we can do that, but to a greater extent, figuring out whether, food stamps are more important than affordable housing, or, health issues should be before transportation issues. They don't dance on the same dance floor in the city budget. So why should they be competing in these budget requests? So I try to put in the narrative that this is if it's number 8 overall on our list, I try to put in the narrative, this is our number 1 request for DEP, and so I try to reorder the priorities by agency. The platform used to let me do that. There was this sneaky way of like putting them in order and then like doing this, sort of global replacement. And then I would put, OMB showed me how to do this a long time ago. I could just put 1 for everything, but then they caught on to us and they don't let us do it anymore. So I don't want to be I want to be a little bit aware of where things fall, because it does read to the public in an order, but I don't want us to get too caught up in it, because FD&Y is never going to see that actually a DOB request was before it. The agencies only get the request for the agencies to respond to.
Do they at least see our numbers so they can tell which one was the highest priority within that particular agency?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. That said, you have 2 documents, and it's also on the tablet for those who would prefer to not look at it on paper. The first document is the order that it ends up on the previously submitted district needs statement. So this is and then it also, I'm sorry, there's also a division between capital and expense. So the first 3 pages are why don't you put your glasses on, Sean? Then you'll see what you're talking about. Yes, the first 3 pages are capital, and then we move to expense requests. I think. Am I missing a page? Yeah.
Oh, you're missing page 50.
Okay. We're missing 50? Is everybody missing?
Yep. I got it. Well, I can do it. Oh, no, we got. Yeah. Here we go.
You have page 50?
Yeah. This is what.
Patricia, can you make a bunch of copies of page 50 so that everybody has it? Will you make some copies of page 50? And then, but we'll start from the first page, and by the time we have copies, we'll, sorry about that, but we cut it. Then this other spreadsheet, and don't mind typos in this because I didn't even prove it, but I just put this together very quickly. This is by agency. So if we want to go back and see, how the agencies fall, this is that. But our number 1 capital request last year was really focused on the Flatbush African Burial Ground. And then it also notes that we are 59th out of 59 community boards in terms of the percentage of residents who have to go more than a quarter of a mile to hit a park. So park assets have been a number 1 priority, or in the top few for a number of years. And then Newkirk Plaza is part of it, is an item that we've been working with DOT to adopt Newkirk Plaza into their Plaza program for a long, long time. I keep being told by the chief of staff at DOT that they're really close and this could happen, but seeing is believing. And so I think keeping that up high is a good idea. Will you hand the microphone to Glenn, please, Nina? Or Martin?
Thank you, Nina.
Just since you said we're 59 to 59 in parks, this particular area that we're talking about that would be a parks being right on the border, is that going to make a significant difference in terms of, are we going to move to 58? Because not that many of our people in our district are going to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, one more park isn't going to make a significant difference in that statistic. But I pull that statistic out just to underscore the sense of urgency we have both for new assets and for maintaining the assets that we do have. Does that make sense?
I'd love to see a park in the middle of the district where a quarter mile in every direction. Get through.
Yes. So, you know, we had a planning fellow on this in 2017 who identified a bunch of spaces for greening. I don't know that there's a central location that's public land that could be parkified. But I think using this argument every time a developer comes with us for a special permit or something like that, and, you know, making green space conditional and then maybe reviewing ODED's report to see, I think there was a sliver lot behind Midwood Field or something like that. Talking about greening dead ends and stuff like that, I think still this stat feeds into maintaining that mantra. Then renovating or upgrading the existing 7-0 precinct house, that has been a request of this community board for over 30 years. Since before Scott was born. So, you know, I think that's the other thing about when you're setting priorities. Do you set the priority based on what you hear most from the public about? Yeah, that's a good reason to make it a priority. Do you base it on a sense of urgency? Because you rank last in something, yeah, that's a good reason. Do you also make it, or do you make it a priority because you've been asking for 30 years and the agency has acknowledged that it's a priority for them too, but it hasn't moved forward. So those are kind of the three reasons why those hit the top. Trench restoration, our streets are caving in. DOT has allocated $60 million to trench restoration. They did it 3 or 4 years ago. They haven't started. We were not a location that was going to get any of that funding. They haven't started any of those projects where they did identify them as a need, and they haven't upped that budget. So I don't know. That's one that it could move back in the that could drop down in our priorities. And I think certainly flooding should float to the top. See what I did there? You know, that is, you know, urgent, and it's becoming more frequent, and we haven't gotten really any satisfying answers. So there's my pitch for some of the top ones, but you've all had an opportunity to review this, and so I won't read each one by one. But I will take any comments, inputs, or ideas about what to move around.
Okay, I know one other comment. The floating to the top, I think is a cute one, but it's also really important. We've had 2 major rainstorms in the not too distant past, and so I would say that should be very, very close to the top. But another way to consider this might be, which ones are we likely to get funded? The ones that were more likely to get funded might make sense to put those higher in the priority list because they're more likely to actually get done, even though there are other things we would really love to. We'd love to see the precinct house move, right? But the likelihood of that getting funded is minuscule.
this is a big philosophical problem. It's a struggle because it's like, do you fight the good fight or do you let the agencies off the hook for not being responsive to a need year after year after year? I hear you and could lean that way, but I also think that if it's not if we're not prioritizing it, then how can we have any expectation that they ever will? Do you fight the good fight or do you yield to reality?
Well, that's just one perspective on it, which is not a bad perspective, but the other one is get as much done as we can get done.
Given the answers we get from the agencies, no, don't be done. Given the responses from the agencies, I think we need to be sort of realistic about the impact of this on the agencies. I think it's a great, I was saying this to Barb the other day, it's pretty minimal. We're just advisory. The city budget has a life of its own, and we're kind of just like a mosquito in the ear of a giant kind of thing. But I feel like, thanks for stopping by, Detective Nuzzy.
Take care. Thanks for coming.
I kind of feel like what we get out of this, well, maybe I should personalize it because I know for sure what I get out of this exercise is really valuable because it gives a great overview of the district. It gives me the opportunity to like dive into data and really like sort of back up what we feel like we see in this office. And so I think that that's why I kind of struggle with the idea of fighting the good fight and putting forth what we really do need. And then sort of accepting that it may have not great impact in how they make decisions.
I have a comment.
So looking at what I'll call priority number one for DEP, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the list. And this is inspection of water main of specific street segments and repair or replace as needed. I think we should either move that to number 4 below the request to renovate, upgrade existing precinct house, or move that above to number 3. And then with regards to, where was it? Reconstruct or upgrade a park amenity. This is item number 2 for DPR. This is with regards to, well, it combines Uma Park and the hotspot tot lot. So scratch that since it combines 2, but then maybe just in the narrative, change Uma Park to below the narrative of the hotspot since Uma Park is done and working.
Yeah.
That's all I have to add.
Football marketing again. That's just.
Also remember, you can look at this list to see where they are by agency.
Got you. So my comment is for the community board budget request with agency responses. And so this is really a shot in the dark, but I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can ask for further clarity on the textbook response of, where did I see it? Give me a second real quick. Yes, the textbook response of the agency will accommodate this issue within existing resources.
Yeah.
I felt like there was one example with, when you mentioned, when you mentioned DCWP, answer it, but then at another time, when you were referencing the percentage of housing violations, then it's like we need more clarity when we say, what do you mean you'll do with existing resources? So is there any way for us to get more clarity when we do that?
So I don't know, but I have started in the draft that I've begun and I'm about halfway through. I've started to put into the narrative, last year's response was that this would be accommodated within existing resources because it's a request for more. And because in this past year, your existing resources did not yield positive outcomes, do not answer that you will accommodate this in existing resources.
We'll see if they read.
And then too, I mean, the other thing we did is at budget consultations this year, I mean, district managers put together the agenda, and every year we just start all over again with our, with the list of things we need for our districts need. This year we didn't do this. This year we sort of picked up from the letter of comment process. Remember in like February, they send us these responses and we look at them, and then we respond that your responses did not, whatever, we seek more clarity, or we just make a comment that the response was inadequate. So this year we started with that. We started with I took all of the community board, the register for all of Brooklyn, and then just counted up how many times each agency said we'll accommodate within existing resources, how many times each agency said go to your elected officials. Every time the agency said requires further study, which half of the times were requests for studies. We kind of just called it out this year, politely and professionally, and said that. So we asked the people at the budget consultation to speak to us in, using meaningful words that. And so, so I'm hoping that and DCP was there, and the borough president's office was there, and in some cases, deputy commissioners, and in some cases commissioners were there. And so hopefully we're kind of whittling away at that culture. But I also blame the Department of City Planning and OMB, because I've got these things to pass out too. This platform that I complain about, I'm going to send this one this way and this way. These are just screenshots. Sorry, Joanne. These are just screenshots of what the platform looks like. When you drop down the menu, they have these like, what does your district need? Choose from these 5 things. And it's like, none of it really, this is, it's not great language. It's not that useful. And so I think that some of these answers are just because the drop-down menu options are limited. So we've asked DCP to redesign it so that there's a fill in the blank instead of a multiple choice. And so maybe that will improve it a little bit too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ms.
Thank you. Thanks. I have a question that is about specificity. So, for example, the DEP item we were looking at earlier with the water main, water main and the flooding. So this says that we've identified several locations, and it says these locations have been brought to DEP's attention. Would we benefit from in this request identifying those streets, intersections? And the same issue kind of comes up with, or my question really comes up with the item above it about the subway station improvements. So it says like this line has had the most requested for, is one of the most requested for security cameras. And I don't know if we would benefit from saying we want security cameras at this station or at this intersection outside of the station.
Yeah, actually, in the actual platform, there's a box where you fill in the location. So that information does end up in the final report. It just isn't on the budget register. And I try to do that as much as I can. I complain in this office all the time about specificity and making sure that we have like actual street addresses and stuff like that. So I try to provide it. So the answer is yes. And yes, but I will be really mindful of it and make sure. The other thing that happens, and to Joanne's point, if I say road bridges in the district are in need of repair, they'll say this request includes more than one request. But I don't want to use. We have a limited number. I don't want to have 5 separate bridge requests. Yeah. So that's kind of a hard thing to get out of them too.
One other just follow-up comment about specificity. On the church app or the repair for subway stations, I would recommend if we could consider adding a specific call out to add ads for the Church Ave bus stop, because the whole street is just completely morphed. It affects cars driving through, people walking across the street. And so I'm not suggesting a new line, but in the description, potentially saying, including but not limited to adding whatever they call them, the concrete pads on that station. Thank you.
Got it.
Just going back specifically to the Church Avenue subway situation, I know that there are plans to put in an elevator system and make it an accessible station. So it seems to me that a lot of these upgrades ought to be tied in with that, with that other, project. I don't know if there's a way to push that.
There is, yeah, that's been updated in the narrative to say that CB 14 was recently presented with ADA upgrades, while exactly what you just said. So,
And I think just to add to that, especially if it's an accessible station, it means that you may be having more vulnerable individuals using that. So safety issues become even more of a concern.
it's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, to what, sorry, to what?
No, for the live streaming.
You can't speak loud. Can't hear you.
Thanks, Barton.
Thank you very much. I agree with what the gentleman was saying. There are times when I've seen people almost fall right there at Church Avenue. Kids, the elderly, and just regular people. It's very dangerous.
Okay, I'm gonna handle that two ways, though. I mean, that could just be a request that there might be money in the maintenance, good repair, budget now in this fiscal year. And if this is something that requires more immediate attention, there's no need to put it on next year's fiscal year's wish list. So we'll handle that both as a service delivery request right here and now, and then we'll add it on to next year's FY 25 budget. But also just put in for that we should make sure that this budget is maintained so that as these needs arise, they're dealt with, with a sense of urgency.
Street side, does that go to DOT then?
On the buses, yeah, the infrastructure on the street is DOT's. Like they're the ones who paint the bus lanes and all of that.
So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point. So that would be a DOT request, not a transit request, but noted.
Something that just popped in my head between, Southern Valencia as well. I just forgot your name, I apologize. William had just said about, Church Ave and also what you had mentioned about the tool, like challenges of differentiating requests. I'm curious, does the tool have a way of like basically tying multiple requests to one overarching thing? So like you mentioned the example of if you were to write a request about like the bridges, they say, hey, these are multiple requests, and it would be it would be very tedious for you to list out, Corteview and all these other bridges. But is there a way to tie, like it's like, hey, if you're gonna make me individually list out 7 bridges, at least give you and the other district managers the tool to be able to tie it all to an overarching thing. Does the tool allow it? Or not really?
Yes, I can do that. And that's what I do. It's not an issue with me writing them all out. I put them all in the narrative. I name them. To Mrs. point about specificity, but then their responses, this contains more than one request. Well, we know. So that's what I don't want to do, is take up multiple requests with what I think is just one item with multiple parts. I think some of you might remember last year, they said that these road segments aren't contiguous. And I was like, they're bridges. Flummoxed. So I'm hearing some changes for reprioritizing some of the capital projects, but if we could just go back to those first 3 pages and let me know if there's anything. And I think really with flooding, number 3 was suggested, but if Newkirk Plaza really is in the works and we have it up in its top 3, I think we could put flooding too, but I think Flatbush African Burial Ground stayed number 1 because we're concerned about focus on that. Okay.
I'd like to add something entirely new that's
Yeah.
not even on the list.
Listening.
Asking the city to build more affordable housing in the district. It's a big ask. But I think we deserve to mention it somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, because I'm trying to parse out how that fits into capital request. It would have to be,
Something over a certain number of dollars, certainly building nature housing.
I'm thinking, projects like Dayton Flats. We would need city owned land to do something like that. So that's what I'm.
Actually, I have a follow-up comment. I spoke to Greg about asking the city to come back to give us a report on how ZQA has been panning out, considering all of the promises they made, the number of units they were predicting would be saved or built in the various
We
districts.
kind of have that in William Cooch's report, the Planning Fellows report from last year, so we can try to tease that out more specifically,
That'd be great.
but,
I'm sure it's not near what I'd seen some anecdotal stuff, but
affordable housing has actually decreased as a percentage of housing in our district, over the past 10 years, 5 years. And
all the more reason to
But-
find some way, I think, to.
yeah, Melissa and then Dawn. No, you first, no, whoever has the mic first goes.
Talking about the affordable housing in those new, structures, it is almost like a scam. I know of people who have applied and they tell them, oh, you did not qualify because of X, Y, and Z. Meanwhile, they produced everything and they kept asking for more things and more things. It is a scam because what happens is these builders, if they do not get enough people for the affordable homes, they will be put back into the main pool and those units will be rented at market price.
So they have incentive to not,
So
yeah.
they have it, and I know it has been happening because I know people who have applied and that has happened to them.
So let me think on that and figure out, unless, Melissa, maybe there's a suggestion in terms of where to bring that for investigation, whether it's the comptroller, or.
Sorry, I just also want to flag that the point of entry for housing is way too high. It's a minimum $75,000-$75,000 for a single person.
30% AMI though?
Yeah.
The units? Okay.
Yeah, and that's not actually affordable housing.
Mhm.
My daughter's proposing for this. She can't buy a house.
The daughter was making.
Deborah? Okay.
As far, from what I understand, is HPD are supposed to be overseeing those units, and they supposed to track how the apartments are being dispersed.
Well, okay, we'll follow up through HPD, but I think it needs who makes sure HPD is accountable? HPD is supposed to make sure that the landlords or the developers are accountable. Who's making sure HPD is accountable? Yeah, state, that's what HCR. So, yeah, we'll follow up on that. That's not really through the budget process, but, and then sort of to answer you and affordable housing. There are choices in the drop downs that lead us to be able to put affordable housing in there. And so I forget how it cuts through versus capital versus expense, but this is all contracted out. So it's, locating, it's whether we're asking them to send an RFP or, we will make a statement about affordable housing in this district because it is clearly needed. It is decreasing over recent time. Our poverty rate is also decreasing, which I think is bizarre. But we also have one of the highest overcrowding rates. We have one of the highest severe rent burdened. I think we're like 7th in the city in terms of being severely rent overburdened. And overcrowding and overburdened. And we also have one of the highest serious housing code violations per 1,000 units. Those are all factors that lend themselves to homelessness. So I think the time has come to, and we did our, we've had planning fellows and we did the Lunch and Learn series on this. So I think the time has come to try to amplify that a little bit, and I'll scooch it in there somewhere around trenches.
So moving on to expense.
Moving on to expense. Here, oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, all that with HPD, with DHCR and a lot of community developers who are nonprofits. I can tell you a lot about all of that, having worked for them for years. But the housing lotteries, that's something that our community board, our district needs to be welcoming of. But I was gonna say, actually, I think that what someone was saying earlier about wanting to say to see more about affordable housing in our capital, we would really need to see it in expense. That is the category it falls in. And I don't know if I missed this in the beginning, or it sounds like not, like we're moving into expense. So I'll wait to see kind of how where things land. But personally, I would like to see some of our expense areas that fall within this area with HPD, DOHMH, just all of these moved up and getting a lot better responses than their city comms wrote response of, hey, yeah, no, looks good. We'll see what it looks like in a year. We'll report back later.
Yeah, I think sometimes they respond to, a couple of those responses have been, this would require a budget increase. That's what we're doing here, folks. So, but then that raises this question that, you know, last year we put community boards, we put ourselves first. We're the only city agency that hasn't had a significant budget increase in, some say 2014, but that was, I don't know if that's significant, then becomes debatable. Our head count has been the same for 27 years, community boards across the city. Many of us work with 2 staff, a district manager and a staff person. Lucky ones like this office get 3 staff. But there's nowhere to go. I mean, and I have a colleague in a district office who's can't, you know, who has a job out, but the salary has not been attractive. People aren't applying and it can't compete. I have another colleague who had to compete with Borough Hall, and Borough Hall won because they could offer more. So it is still important. And yet I don't know with, you know, with comments about affordable housing, other things that are going on in the district. I'm not gonna fight quite as hard as I did last year to have it number 1. I do feel like if we're not saying it's really important, it's gonna be hard to get anybody else to take it seriously. We talk about this in the future of community board groups, but there's gonna be a peg. And for that, you know, budgets are being cut across all city agencies. So using our number 1 expense budget request for ourselves may not be advisable. I certainly wouldn't mind doing it, but I can be talked out of it. You know, things that are popping up in terms of service delivery, which is where, you know, really where expense budgets lie. I spoke to you about forestry. I feel really strongly about moving that up. I feel strongly about moving up homelessness, you know, anything having to do with street outreach for homeless people. Our shelters aren't going very well. Our men's shelter on Duryea Place, which I was as excited as you could possibly be about a homeless shelter in your district. I was okay with this because it was Black Vets for Social Justice, and they're doing such a good job over on Coney Island Avenue, and they included me in that cab because it's on the border with 12. And I was so impressed with them and their staff and their programming. And it's been I don't want to say disaster because I don't want to overstate it. It is not going well on Duryea Place. On a daily basis. It's not going well for the theater. It's not going well. The supportive housing facility that's next door to the homeless facility, which I thought was ill-advised, is turning out to not be going well. The residents over there are apoplectic at this point. They have not started their community advisory board meetings. It is not going well over there. And I don't know what the ask is. If this is an expense budget, we need more programming, they need more staff, they need something. But I think it's important the women's shelter at Kenilworth has been, you know, quiet, but quiet to the point of, you know, we're not getting complaints in the office really on Kenilworth. I think we're getting complaints from them actually. and then the shelter, the migrant shelter on Coney Island Avenue, still, it's open in April. It still doesn't have a community-based organization in place. Webster? Yeah.
So you brought up Coney Island Avenue, and that's relegated to asylum seekers. So given that, how are we going to address that in this budget request? And is it ceremonial? Because at this point, here's what I'm thinking, is that if there is a budget request from this community board regarding that, then it strengthens the city's position in terms of asking for federal dollars or state dollars. So what my question is there a place for that here since it's a new development?
While the city endeavors to gain state and federal funding, it must step forth with the resources that are on hand now at a city level, including legal services, counseling, and support agencies that are put in place at each shelter expeditiously. That's how I.
Let's see what happens.
Makes sense? I mean, yeah, but,
So are we?
It's not actually the budget request.
it is a budget request. Make sure that you're funding adequate legal services. Make sure you're funding community-based organizations such that they will enter into contracts and the contracts can be expedited. There's got to be a reason that a community-based organization hasn't taken a bite of a contract apple at this location in this many months. In the meantime, you know, the clock was ticking on those families filing documentation that would start their working paper days. They are lucky that their kids are at PS 217 and frankly, they're lucky that there's staff in this office that speak Spanish and Sarah has experience doing pro work and has taken this on because of a great deal of interest in the topic and is working with the DA's office who's going to do a legal training clinic in this community. These are things that shouldn't be coming out of a community board office with our, 2014 budget. But
We'll put it in our expense budget.
yeah,
Okay. And then let's just talk about where we want that to be. And so that will, depending on where expanding street outreach lands, then I think that request to ensure adequate funding for services and housing shelter for asylum seekers should follow that immediately after.
We're going to have a substantive effect on that, but I think the important thing is if enough community boards cite it, then the mayor's office can say, hey, 50 of the fifth, whatever, have all said that it's an issue. And so this is our community speaking, and it's not just me. I just want you to see that we have the same, concerns. Support.
yeah. Okay, so affordable housing, issues of homelessness will move up. Community board staff, Newkirk Plaza can move down a bit. Sanitation can move down maybe a smidge or stay there and have affordable housing and homeless issues above it. I'd like to keep it in the top 5 because it's impacting our district on a daily basis. The fact that we don't have a service within DSNY called cleaning sounds funny, but manual litter patrol is the service, and they've replaced it with something they're calling TNT, which puts it's AC/DC, really, right? You'll have that in your head and you'll be mad at me later. But it just drives me crazy that so they've said, DSNY has said, like, you can get city council members to spend their Clean NYC funding initiative by giving it back to the city for a baseline service. We have 4 council members in this district where districts overlap with one, it might work out, but we're getting it from some council members, not others, especially those that don't cover that much of the district. So are you really telling me that this district should have cleaning distributed inequitably because of your funding process? Is that the message I'm supposed to take away? Because that's what I'm hearing. Musa.
So we're balancing a few different things in order to figure out what's our like top 5. And I'm wondering if, not to add something else to the consideration, given the capital and the capital expense or capital budget side, we wanted to dramatically increase the ranking of the flooding item. Do we want to also bring it up on the expense side as well? Or no, I don't know what's more effective.
I don't know that there's a lot of expense, like, on the expense side, I think it's like cleaning catch basins. I don't think our flooding results from cleaning from the catch basins. It results from a lack of capacity underground and a lack of permeable surface and rain gardens and the sort of infrastructure above ground that would be capital. I will keep cleaning, I will keep expense, catch basin stuff up toward the top, but I don't know if it needs to be in 5. It might land in 5, depending on how many of the affordable housing things can kind of go under one paragraph.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I thought there was a catch basin one, but I can't find it now. I'm referring to 24 out of 25.
Actually, this is handy for that, because DEP,
Oh, okay.
clean catch basins, in expense number 9.
This is number, yeah. So there's the clean catch basin one, and then number 24 of 25, that's probably why I was confused, is some type of flooding item. I'm not sure if it's redundant or.
Well, it's because the drop-down menu doesn't really capture what's really needed. And so even like that installing, I was going to say this at the top about capital, installing catch basins or installing water mains isn't even necessarily exactly what we need. It's just one of the only choices. So we choose their language and then try to clarify it in the narrative. And I think in the narrative, it says something like, the drop-down menu is limited, and we don't know if it's actually water mains that are needed here. We just need DEP to tell us what we need in order to mitigate the flooding. This is a request for whatever that is.
Yeah, so I was looking at some of these, and these seem like the only preventative maintenance kind of issues on the budget. I'm just going through, and I think that's more of those items are important to prevent more capital expenses later on.
Yeah.
I gotta go next. Are you still talking about flooding?
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. So page 51, DCWP, expense request for DCA. I would just want to tease out if adding cannabis enforcement at the city level is something that needs to be addressed in this line item as well. I think when we talked about this item last year, unlicensed cannabis shops that are also selling tobacco and e-cigarettes wasn't as pervasive as it became after we discussed this. And it might be something that we want to add to the narrative, even though the Office of Cannabis Management has received funding for more robust enforcement. They're still working in concert with the sheriff's office and with DCWP. So I would imagine that maybe we want to change the narrative a little bit there to include that.
I actually reached out to the precinct this week to try to figure out where we're at with enforcement on TRD and ERCD and cannabis. And then the week went, oh, it's only Wednesday. I don't have the answer yet.
Is that sort of like what we're going to be dealing with in my committee on the 24th, is basically to make recommendations again for additional language? So that's something we would discuss at our meeting as well. The inclusion that, trying to find a way to add the whole cannabis discussion to that request.
In this line,
I mean, I just know we have on my agenda,
well, this isn't, It's about the expense to the agency, DCA and DCWP. I mean, I kind of understand what you're asking. I don't know how to fuse the two
Okay, I mean, certainly
because it's,
happy to.
because to the enforcement of closing down the shop is the sheriff's office. Yeah.
I mean, however you want to play it, I'm simply saying. You know, we're happy to sort of hammer out extra language so poor Sean doesn't get stuck having, to stay in front of her computer till 3 a.m. working on language that we could be contributing. Just an offer.
Sure. I think it's just simple enough to add cannabis
Okay.
to it.
Don't overwork it. Gotcha.
Yeah. I'll also try to gather some intel to figure out where things are at so that I can couch it accordingly.
And if it's a conversation that you're having in committee and something comes from that conversation, this isn't, I don't know when you're submitting it, but it's not due until after your meeting.
Yeah.
So certainly can massage it more, massage it more.
And I do have one last personal request in that number 23, I know that if Dwayne were here, he'd say we need to put 23 higher up in supporting local businesses. So just on behalf of him, I just thought I'd add that.
Okay, heard. There are, as we get into the middle of this, we've got more DOHMH and HPD, HRA. I don't know if maybe kind of going along with what I said about the orders of things not being sort of not being a fair task, but also not being critical. I wonder if maybe I should think about putting the ones that are related all together. So we're not sort of next year when we do this, we're not jumping around. So it doesn't go DSNY, DOHMH, NYPD. You know what I mean? It doesn't go like core service, human service, infrastructure service, human service. Maybe I'll try that this year. Does anybody have a objection or reaction to the idea that they would sort of be more lumped together so that related needs flow as one reads this list?
Makes sense to do it that way.
I think I'd have to, I think I'd have to see how it actually reads in terms of priorities, because if as it's listed in this document is the priorities that we're asking, and if one of those items that there's a better flow, but it actually isn't as important as something that's falling below it, I think I'd have to see it. I mean, it makes sense. And I can see in some areas where it's a necessity, but I think we'd have to see how it works.
Okay.
Yeah.
I realize that this entails a certain amount of redundancy, but I'm wondering if, for the sake of reviewing things, at least within ourselves, it might make sense to group things based on agency and the asks, but then, I don't know, but then also have overall priority.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of try to
Does
do
that make
that.
sense?
That the platform doesn't let me do it, but I try to do it in the narrative. And then I did that for tonight's exercise like this too. If you want, maybe I can figure out a way to attach this too, so that it goes to the agencies like that. I mean, I hear you, but it's a struggle with how they want it read.
Yeah.
And then
I'm just
also,
saying, at least for the sake of our reviewing things,
yeah,
if we cluster it and say, okay, we're going to go through the NYPD stuff,
Yeah.
and so
I've done that this way using this.
We had the same request last year, and that's why we have this document this year.
And then, I'm sorry, just one more thing. And then in the narrative, it unfolds more organically because in the narrative, it is all grouped into needs for healthcare and facilities. And then there's health, there's needs for older New Yorks, and there's needs for homelessness. So it is broad categories, subcategories, and that does stay within related needs. And those agencies are grouped together on the platform. HRA, DSS, DOHMH, I think ACS, they're all together.
I just had a clarifying question in terms of how to read this. But in terms of the agency response, so like on number 5, expense DPR, where it says this would require a larger expense budget, does that essentially eliminate that request or our chance of getting those funds for that? And then like the one following, it says the agency will accommodate this issue within existing resources. I mean, at least the way I'm reading it, it makes it sound like, okay, we have a chance with that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm more encouraged by them saying this would require a bigger budget. I'm like, yeah, that's all right. Whereas will accommodate within existing resources sounds like, yeah, we're buying into do more with less. We're buying it, or Martin Marr at our borough commissioner for parks said, look, I just have to do the best with what I'm given. And I was like, you do, which is why you should wish to be given more. And so, I don't know, the responses are not very meaningful, but that's why this year when we went to budget consultations, we said, your agency responded that you will accommodate within existing resources. Does this mean you cut from something else in order to accommodate this in your existing resource? And then they said, no, we were able to accommodate it because our headcount is lower. And so, it's very Kafkaesque.
Okay. Yeah, just having applied for and so many grant applications, that's what I'm used to reading through and being like, okay, so what does this mean? And should we strategize our priorities according to this language that they've given us back?
The drop-down menu limits them, and then I've asked at the budget consultation, HPD stands out because the commissioner stopped by, the deputy commissioner for this, that, and the other thing was all there. So it was a high level meeting, and they're knowledgeable people. And I said, well, we really appreciate how fruitful this conversation is. Why aren't we getting this level of detail and this input on the actual process? You're not facing publicly, you're just with us at this meeting. The document that we put out when you answer these questions, that's a publicly facing document. And don't you want to put a better face forward? And we see who's here today. And then I said, do you have interns do the budget thing? Because it feels very internship-ish. And then Margaret Carey said, no, I do it. And but we did, ACS was really open with their frustration too. They were like, yeah, we can't answer, we have a drop-down menu and that limits us. I'm like, so then let's work together. Instead of us being mad at you, let's be mad at DCP together and see if we can improve the platform from looking at it through the other side of the looking glass.
Anything else about this expense portion?
New needs, things that aren't on there. Schools, I'm trying to get the count on. We're still considered a district in need of seats at the elementary level. Why are you laughing, Florencia?
New needs.
Yeah.
New needs. We have a hole that's not being addressed. So.
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll put that we can't have new needs because you haven't met the old needs.
Right?
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Number 20 on page 54. The headline is increased enforcement of canine waste laws. But the bulk of what the narrative is about something much different. Especially in like illegal dumping. Are we, maybe it's putting canine waste laws in there and making that headline a little bit more specific to dumping.
Well, we don't have control over the headlines. That's in their drop down.
So we,
I will try to find.
so we just have to make it sexy, but, you know, we gotta choose like the thing that really angers people the most and then make our case.
It's what is that called? Clickbait.
But yeah, she made some clickbait there. Okay, I'm fine with clickbait. I'm just
But
curious.
I noted, and I will see if there is a more appropriate enforcement selection in the crazy drop down. Lawrence, you might need it.
I just wanted to ask who's responsible for the homeless folks that have started to gather in the park along Parkside?
That would be the street,
Across the street.
the street outreach team. So that their Breaking Ground is contracted by Department of Homeless Services or DSS. And the street outreach team is incredibly responsive. There is rarely a person we bring to their attention where they don't go, oh yeah, that's Big John. This is his story. He's originally from here. You know, he experiences schizophrenia. But people who are unsheltered homeless individuals do not have to accept the services offered to them. And you might remember me saying more than once that the statistic that DHS or Breaking Ground throws out is it takes somewhere between 250 and 300 encounters with an unsheltered individual before they accept those services. So they have to go talk to them every single day for a year. And so that's the line we're trying to share with the community members when they call and they're complaining about somebody who's apparently street homeless. We say, you know, I don't want to call the police, or I don't want to call. You're giving the street outreach, a very expert street outreach team, an opportunity to engage, build trust and rapport every time you call. It's helping the person, at least eventually. But I do think there needs to be a more robust element that deals with substance misuse. I think that there's a reason why people aren't accepting services, and part of it, yes, has to do with their illness and how mental illness manifests, and trust and stuff like that, with experiences that they may have had at shelters. But I'm unconvinced that we couldn't be doing better.
You all look very satisfied.
That's the right word.
I just wanted to offer one counter. I've actually called Breaking Ground quite a few times, and in code blue 911 get transferred over 311, and they've taken a very long time, if not never shown up. So a really, really long time to respond, and it's really, really disheartening. I think we're really short-staffed by Breaking Ground in our community. I think they have a lot that they're responding to, and they've honestly overstretched. And I used to work for them back when they were Common Ground, and when they made the change to Breaking Ground, but they've contracted out with so much in the city. And
so you're seeing a decline.
It's a huge
increase in time and a decline in service.
I hung out with people on the street for like 45 minutes, an hour, and still nobody shows up.
Because their line is that they have to show up within the hour. I'll call and see if we can get some numbers on that, and maybe then that's a request that we need to increase the contracts, or see from, like, Casey Burke will probably be candid about what their needs are.
So the recommendation from this committee is going to go before the board.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for process. I can reorder these, try to get it out to the board by Friday to And then you'll all make sure that it reflects the conversation tonight within reason. And then the document that goes, yeah, I'm not gonna be perfect. The document that then goes before the board for ratification at the public hearing will be that document that everybody will have a chance to preview with whatever tweaks and or major objections arise at that public hearing. Does that sound okay? Okay, because I want to acknowledge that we didn't walk away with like 1, 2, 3, 4, I will, but I heard everything and I think that I can reflect what was said.
So just to reconfirm, Sean, are you saying the hope is by end of basically by this Friday evening, we have language, and then the goal would be for the board members to review it in time for the Monday?
I'm glad you asked that, because the other thing, what I think the document for the public hearing might be open to suggestion, but is just that third column where it's, assign additional building inspectors without the narrative, and certainly without the agency response, because or maybe shorten the narrative. I don't know. I'm worried about the hearing getting bogged down in what the narrative is instead of what the item is. And the ability to update all of these narratives in 2 days.
And that's why I asked, because it's a voluminous amount of, work and edits, right? So that's why I was wondering what the timeline, what the ideal timeline is and what you're hoping for, right?
I could try to do it with just shortened narratives, which is like 2 sentences to say why it's, or I could just do it with the items. I don't know. What do people think?
I'll always talk. I think the more information, so maybe you can do it in 2 phases, maybe just do one as the abbreviated and then a second document that has the full narrative for the people who want to read it. Because I think people are really interested to learn that their particular bridge or their particular park gets referenced in the document. They're going to feel more engaged.
But given that one of the drop downs was about canine waste and the narrative was really about commercial dumping, I would just perhaps, if you do need to shorten them, if the CB request does not reflect what the narrative is, then I would keep it in within the scope of what you can get done. But the more information, the better.
Gotcha.
So the mic board.
Yeah.
Another question for you, Sean. Wait, you're gonna say something though.
Just if we could note that the community board budget should reflect the need for additional weeks.
This is the part where they're gonna say, "Oh, bro, your budget is this much for this year." It's like, great, you didn't answer a question. Hey, isn't this their prime day?
They need to have a New York City vendor ID.
Yes, MOOCs, right? Or MOOCs, however they put it. MOOCs. Yeah, I made up taking the process. We didn't just with the money.
There's a lot of weird more from us.
Yeah.
We're gonna take on like some blame, much less give us another.
That's another story. So a question for you, Sean. Like we've been talking, so for instance, given some of the like firsthand experience Melissa shared regarding, breaking ground, I'm wondering is this a two-way street for feedback where there's feedback you're going to incorporate, but also as well, like we have the document that you shared with us, if we like email the office with some suggested language, or is it better for it to be a one-way where you and the team will make those edits and then you'll share those with us and then we review them?
I don't know.
I think it might be a time issue.
Okay, understood.
Monday.
Oh, yeah, that's, I understand. Understood.
But you can send anything, suggestions, edits, wording, new ideas, whenever you want. And if they're in time to make it to the Friday draft for the Monday meeting, cool. If not, though, it's stuff that can still go into the narrative, and I will be editing this up until October 31st.
Okay.
And then, sometimes I buy an extra, I turn it in a week late because I hear other boards are doing it, but I'd say by the end of October, it can still go in. Even after that, though, too, remember, this document ends, but our advocacy for this community doesn't. So if there's ever anything, whether it's a budget thing that has to wait for the next budget year or something that's service delivery, or just putting it on the radar for funding, you should always provide your input.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. One last thing.
Yeah.
There's one last thing.
I want to wrap it up.
But also, everybody should know that Wimpy is decaf over there.
Yeah.
Apparently Barton.
Yeah, I may have had some, I did have a cup actually before I left the house. You noticed it?
Yeah.
Luckily, the rest of the room now knows that. One other, you'd said at the very beginning why you feel this exercise is useful. One other thing that it's that's sort of not a nice thing to do, but we can always use the document as an I told you so. So if we say, hey, we asked for so much more branch pruning in this district, and we know of 4 cars that got crushed by falling branches, and that's going to cost the city how much? So, I mean, sometimes we can look back, and if there's something,
Have you met me? Of course I do that.
Of course.
simply saying, I'm defending the value of the document, is that we can show the city, we told you so. We said this was going to happen. We predicted it was going to happen, and it did happen. So will you listen to us next time?
Yeah, I mean, I refer back a lot to the comptroller's reports on claims that they're filing out from damage of, caused by falling tree branches, et cetera.
Great. All right, so that will be the process. The document will be sent out Friday by end close of business for review, and then we will have a public hearing and take any additional comments from board members, and then we'll bring it to the full board. We don't have any other business, do we? Okay. Well, I appreciate you all coming and helping and all of your excellent feedback and thoughtfulness. And please stay a while and network.
Yeah, it's nice to be back in person, like in this more conversational setting. So thanks for coming out tonight. And thanks to our new board members for being here, especially our newest one.
I said Patricia Bateman, I know you Bateman.
I've been having time.
Yeah.